On the morning of his own wedding, a 19-year-old sailor is arrested at the feast, in front of his bride, his father, and every friend he has in the world. And no one, not even the men arresting him, will tell him what he is accused of. He is young, decent, about to be made captain of his own ship, engaged to a woman he adores, and utterly incapable of imagining that 3 men in the room already envy him enough to destroy him. Within hours he is standing before a prosecutor with the power to save him or bury him, and for one strange, hopeful moment, it looks as if he will be saved. Then the prosecutor reads the letter in his hand a second time, turns pale, and makes a decision that will cost an innocent man 14 years of his life sealed inside a sea fortress where prisoners are never released and never forgotten because they are never officially there at all. This is the story of what a good man becomes after the world does that to him, and of what happens when he finally comes back, wealthy beyond calculation, patient beyond belief, and absolutely unwilling to forgive. The novel is The Count of Monte Cristo, published in installments between 1844 and 1846 by Alexandre Dumas, working with his collaborator Auguste Maquet, in a France still buzzing with the aftershocks of Napoleon and the July monarchy that followed him. Dumas himself was the grandson of a French nobleman and an enslaved black woman from Saint-Domingue, a man who had watched his own father, a celebrated general, humiliated and impoverished by political enemies, and revenge, engineered patiently and served with style, runs through nearly everything he wrote. The book opens with a date precise enough to feel like a court record. On the 24th of February 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the three-master, the Pharaon from Smyrna, Trieste and Naples. A ship coming home. A young first mate named Edmond Dantes standing at the prow, doing another officer's job because that officer died at sea. Competent, well-liked, about to be rewarded for it. Dumas wants you to feel, in these first calm pages, exactly how much this one young man has to lose, before he shows you 3 separate men who each have a reason to make sure he loses it. Here is where the story actually begins. It is always an event at Marseille for a ship to come into port, and the whole town seems to turn out to watch the Pharaon glide in, because half the city's fortunes ride on ships exactly like her. Dantes has sailed her home safely after her captain's death, stopping briefly at the island of Elba on a private errand for the dying man, a favor that will turn out to be the most dangerous thing he has ever done, though he does not know it yet. Waiting for him on shore is everything a young man could want: a promotion to captain, the blessing of his ship owner, Monsieur Morel, an aging father who has gone hungry to keep him fed, and a beautiful Catalan girl named Mercedes, who has waited faithfully for his ship to return. But 3 other men are watching him too. Danglars, the ship's jealous supercargo, wants Dantes's new command for himself. Fernand, Mercedes's cousin, wants Dantes's bride for himself. And Caderousse, a drunken neighbor, wants nothing in particular except to watch someone luckier than himself fall. Over wine, almost as a joke, Danglars drafts an anonymous letter accusing Dantes of carrying secret messages for the exiled Napoleon. Fernand, hearing it, does not stop him. He posts it. 4 men will be at the wedding feast the next day. Only 3 of them know what is coming. First, betrayal at the feast. The wedding is in full swing, wine poured, Dantes and Mercedes glowing at the center of the room, when police officers walk in and ask quietly for Edmond Dantes. He goes with them, still believing it is a formality, certain his conscience is clear, and is brought before the deputy crown prosecutor of Marseille, a coldly ambitious young man named Gérard de Villefort. At first, Villefort is almost kind, amused by the absurdity of the charge, ready to dismiss an innocent sailor and get back to his own engagement party that same evening. Then he asks to see the letter Dantès was asked to deliver, reads the name of the man it is addressed to, and his whole manner changes in an instant. The letter is addressed to Villefort's own father, a secret Bonapartist, whose exposure would ruin Villefort's career and marriage before it even begins. Villefort is not protecting France, he is protecting himself. He burns the letter that could clear Dantès, promises to help him, and then, the same night, signs the order that will make Edmond Dantès disappear. Dantès, still stunned and uncomprehending, is placed in a carriage. He asks again and again where they are taking him, and gets no answer, until, through a small barred window, he sees a black shape rising out of the sea ahead of the boat that is now rowing him toward it, and understands before anyone says the word. He is being taken to the Chateau d'If. Second, 14 years in the dark. The Chateau d'If is a fortress prison built on a rock in the bay, reserved for men the state wants to vanish without a trial or a trace, and Dantès is thrown into a cell and simply left there, with no charge ever read to him, no sentence ever given, and no date ever set for release. Days become months, become years. He begs, he petitions, he is ignored. He does not know that Villefort has personally ensured his file is buried, that his father has starved himself to death from grief and poverty, waiting for a son who never writes, or that Mercedes, told he is dead, will eventually marry the very cousin who helped destroy him. Alone in the dark, with nothing but his own mind, Dantès reaches the one decision a man reaches when hope runs out entirely. Dantès said, "I wish to die," and had chosen the manner of his death, and fearful of changing his mind, he had taken an oath to die, resolving to starve himself rather than go on. He is saved from that oath by the strangest event of his imprisonment. A scratching sound behind the wall, night after night, that turns out to be another prisoner, tunneling in the wrong direction entirely, trying to escape. Instead of an escape route, Dantès finds Abbe Faria, an elderly Italian priest and scholar who has spent years digging toward what he believed was freedom, and finds, instead, a fellow captive who will spend the rest of his own life turning that ruined dig into the greatest education Dantès could ever have received. Third, the Abbe's gift. Faria is no ordinary cellmate. He is a walking library, fluent in half a dozen languages, trained in mathematics, chemistry, history, and swordsmanship. And over the years that follow, he teaches Dantès everything he knows, turning an unschooled sailor into a man who can pass for a nobleman, a scholar, a financier, or a priest, whichever the moment requires. In exchange, Dantès gives the old man the one thing a prisoner truly has: loyalty, patience, and company through the isolation that has nearly broken them both. And it is Faria, piecing together every detail Dantès can remember of his arrest, who first sees clearly what Dantès himself never could: that his ruin was not bad luck or a bureaucratic accident, but a deliberate plot, engineered by 3 men he trusted, each acting from petty jealousy and self-interest, and one of them, Villefort, from something closer to outright treachery. Watching the fire this revelation lights in the younger man's eyes, Faria says something that will define the rest of the novel. I regret now having helped you in your late inquiries, and when Dantes asks why, the old priest answers plainly, because it has instilled a new passion in your heart, that of vengeance. Faria has given Dantes an education. He has also, without quite meaning to, given him a purpose sharp enough to survive on. And with his dying breath, gasping through a final stroke, the old man gives him one thing more: the location of a treasure hidden for centuries on a small, uninhabited island called Monte Cristo. A fortune Faria always half believed was a fantasy, but which he now bequeaths, in full, to the only man who was ever kind to him. Fourth, the sack and the sea. When Faria finally dies, the guards, following prison custom for a body no one will claim, sew his corpse into a burial sack to be dropped into the sea that same night. Dantes, in the boldest gamble of his life, cuts his friend's body loose in the dark, hides it in his own cell, and sews himself into the sack in Faria's place, betting his entire future on the guards not noticing the switch by torchlight. They do not notice. 2 guards carry the sack up to the fortress ramparts, tie a heavy cannonball to its feet, swing it once, twice, and hurl it out over the water. Dantes falls through open night air toward the Black Sea below, cuts himself free of the sack with a knife Faria left him just before he hits the surface, and claws his way up through the freezing dark to breathe air as a free man for the first time in 14 years. He is picked up, exhausted and half drowned, by a passing smuggling ship, and it is on the deck of that ship, under an ordinary sky he never expected to see again, that Edmond Dantes effectively ceases to exist, replaced, from this point on, by whoever he chooses to become. He steers the smugglers, quietly, toward one particular island, Monte Cristo. There, alone among the rocks Faria described to him from memory, he finds the treasure exactly where the old man said it would be. Enough gold and jewels to make him one of the richest men in Europe. Edmond Dantes, penniless prisoner of the Chateau is gone. In his place, richer than kings and utterly unrecognizable, stands the Count of Monte Cristo. Fifth, and last for tonight, the return of the Count. Years pass while the new Count builds his fortune into an instrument, gathers information on every one of the 3 men who ruined him, and studies exactly where each one has landed. Danglars is now a wealthy baron and banker, his fortune built on debt and speculation. Fernand has stolen a title, a fortune, and Mercedes herself, and calls himself the Count de Morcerf. Villefort has become the most powerful prosecutor in Paris, feared by everyone, hiding his own buried scandals behind a mask of icy righteousness. One by one, the mysterious, magnetic new Count of Monte Cristo arrives in Parisian society, dazzling everyone with his wealth and his unreadable calm, and inserts himself into each man's life exactly where it is weakest. He does not simply kill his enemies. Killing, he has decided, would be mercy compared to what he actually intends. He exposes Danglars' fraud until his fortune and credit collapse to nothing. He reveals Fernand's old crime, betraying the very man whose service he once swore, back in the war years, before he ever met Mercedes, before the whole of Parisian society, so completely that Fernand's own son publicly disowns him. And Villefort he saves for last, patiently surfacing the prosecutor's most carefully buried secret in open court, in front of the entire city that fears him, at the exact moment it will cost him everything at once: his career, his household, and his family. The Count built this collapse for years, plank by plank, exactly the way he once had a raft. Except this time, nothing was left to chance, and nothing was left standing. So what does all of it add up to? Watching his enemies fall one by one, the Count discovers something he never planned for: that vengeance, once finally achieved in full, does not feel like the triumph he spent 14 years imagining. Danglars loses everything and is left broken and begging. Fernand takes his own life rather than live disgraced. And Villefort, exposed before all of Paris, descends into madness in the same house where he once signed away an innocent man's life without a second thought. The Count watches Villefort break entirely, and for the first time in the whole long, patient machinery of his revenge, he flinches. Because ruining a man on paper and watching a human mind actually shatter in front of you, it turns out, are not the same experience at all. He begins quietly to wonder whether he has been acting as an instrument of God's justice, as he always told himself, or simply visiting on other people the same excess of suffering that was once visited on him. The book's final answer is not a clean one. Dumas does let his patient, ruined and remade hero find something like peace at the very end, sailing off with a small measure of grace still intact, and one relationship rebuilt honestly rather than manipulated into being. But he earns that peace only by first learning the limit of revenge itself, that it can restore your name, your fortune, and your power, and still leave the 14 stolen years exactly as empty as they always were. It can force 3 guilty men to answer for what they did, and it still cannot hand back a father who starved waiting for a letter, or a young bride who believed the wrong story and married the wrong man. The Count of Monte Cristo is, underneath the disguises and the fortune, a very old and very simple warning that the person who wrongs you will eventually pay a price, one way or another, but the years you spend engineering that price are years you are not spending on anything else, and no verdict, however complete, refunds them. In his final letter, left behind for the 2 young people whose future he has quietly protected throughout, he leaves them the line the entire book has been walking toward. There is neither happiness nor misery in the world. There is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness. Here is the one thing to carry out of this story into your week. Almost everyone eventually meets their own Villefort, a person who chooses their own comfort and advancement over your good name, quietly, in a moment when no one is watching, and simply hopes you never find out how or why. The temptation, when that happens, is to let the injury calcify into something that runs your whole life from underneath, the way it very nearly consumed Edmond Dantes for 14 silent years in the dark. This story does not ask you to forgive easily, and it does not pretend that patience alone made its hero happy. The Count gets everything he set out to take, and it still costs him something he cannot get back. But notice what actually saved him, both in the cell and after it. Not the hatred itself, but the discipline built underneath it, the study, the patience, the quiet decision to become formidable rather than simply bitter. This week, take the injury you are still privately carrying and ask which part of it you are actually holding on to. The plan to grow past it, or the wound itself, kept fresh on purpose. Wait and build and hope, in that order, and let the waiting do something. Alexandre Dumas spent well over 1,000 pages proving one unsettling thing: that a man wronged deeply enough can remake himself into almost anything. Richer, cleverer, more powerful than the people who broke him, and that even total, engineered vengeance cannot hand him back the years, the father, or the ordinary happiness he actually lost. Edmond Dantes walked into a wedding feast as a penniless sailor and walked out of a prison sack as the architect of his own second life. If this walk through the Count of Monte Cristo gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time, we travel to ancient Thebes and a king who solves every riddle except the one about himself. Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. And tell me in the comments, is there a wrong in your own life you are still quietly waiting to settle? And what would it actually cost you to let the waiting become building instead?